As the huge franchise it is, Yu-Gi-Oh has spanned multiple different video games in the past, many of which had some really unique cards in them. For better or for worse, many of these cards never got brought over to the TCG, and in this video we're going to be going over some of the best of these. Starting us off at number 10, we have Dark Flare Knight from Reshef of Destruction. This is a level 6 fire warrior whose text reads, a warrior of flame and darkness. If it's in the player's graveyard, it is able to summon a Mirage Knight to the own field. Wonky English aside, this is easily one of the best cards from Reshef, allowing you to bypass many of the game's crazy difficulty spikes with its effects. If this version of Dark Flare Knight is sent to the graveyard in any way, you can summon a Mirage Knight for free, and since Reshef's rules are a tad different to the real games, you don't even need a Mirage Knight in your deck to pull this off. Mirage Knight itself sweetens the deal even more. It's a 2800 attack beater that will, at the start of your opponent's turn, transform into a Dark Magician and a Flame Swordsman. So off just putting a single Dark Flare in the graveyard, you get 2 big monsters out for free. But how hard is it to dump it there? Well, Reshef may not have cards like Foolish Burial available, but it does allow you to freely discard cards from your hand at will. So getting this effect off is as easy as drawing into your Dark Flare Knight. It's no wonder that most players' first real grind session will be to get enough money to buy a copy of this and try to cheese the rest of the game. The only similar card to this has only gotten much later on, and you pretty much need a guide for it, in the Winged Dragon of Ra Phoenix mode, which also triggers when it's sent to the graveyard but floats into the Winged Dragon of Ra instead. Except that Reshef's version of Ra can pay life points until you have 1 left to damage your opponent's life points by the same amount, which may sound OP, but it's not an effect you want to use that often, since a lot of the game's difficult fights involve fighting multiple duels in a row without a health refill. Either way, that game's versions of these cards certainly put the real ones to shame, even if we could never get something quite like that in the TCG. And at number 9, we've got Kiteroid. This is a level 1 wind machine monster with only 200 attack and 400 defense. During damage calculation, if your opponent's monster is attacking you directly, you can either discard this card or banish it from your graveyard to prevent any battle damage from that battle. As far as hand traps go, this is a pretty unique one that you can use it twice. One time by discarding it, and then another by banishing from the graveyard. Its effect is basically a better Karibo, and even if that was never a meta hand trap, this made this card decent enough to be great in the game it's available in. You can play Kiteroid in either Tag Force 3, Special, or Duel Links, and exclusively in those, since this is one of those cards that never got brought over to the TCG in any way. Though there'd be very little reason to ever play this in real life due to the existence of better anti-battle phase hand traps like Battle Fader or Swift Scarecrow. Tag Force 3 didn't have either of those due to being released in 2008, a couple of years before either of those came out. Duel Links lacked them due to balance reasons. The battle phase is generally much more important in that game, and cards that skip it like Fader would be much more powerful since you're forced to go straight to the end phase afterwards. Kiteroid was actually strong enough to be meta in Duel Links for several years, and it even still sees play there to this day, even if it's not as represented as it once was. That's partly because it was so prevalent that it even got limited to 2, which is a much harsher restriction in Duel Links than it is in the TCG, as you can only have 2 limit 2 cards in your whole deck. Even its searcher, Megaroid City, had to be limited to 2 as well, as having that much access to Kiteroids made stalling way too good of a tactic. Even if we get this card eventually, it'll be nothing more than pack filler for the TCG, but Duel Links players will always know how many duels were won or lost due to it. And at number 8, we've got 100 Eye Dragon. This is a level 8 Dark Synchro Dark Monster with 3000 attack, and it must be made with a non-tuner minus a Dark Tuner. Its effects are that when it attacks, your opponent cannot activate spells or traps until the end of the damage step, and then it gains the effects of all Infernity monsters in your graveyard. Also, if it's destroyed, you can add a card from your deck to your hand. So, to get it out of the way, Dark Synchros must be made by subtracting the levels of a non-tuner and a Dark Tuner until they reach the inverse of their levels. So in this case, you need them to go down to -8. Also, Dark Tuners don't mean a tuner of the Dark attribute, but rather a specific set of monsters that were used to only make Dark Synchros in the anime. For example, you can use a Dark Tuner Nightmare Hand, who's a level 10, and minus a level 2 monster to make 100 Eye Dragon. Of course, this is a mechanic from the anime that's only ever been implemented in the Tag Force games, and rightfully so. If new players struggle with all the summoning methods already, imagine if anything of this sort existed. Either way, despite how meh most of the Dark Tuners were in the games, this version of 100 Eyes is way cooler than the original. Even if the one we got can banish any level 6 or lower Dark monster from your graveyard and copy its effect, most of the time you were copying your Infernity Necromancer or Mirage anyways, and this one lets you get both without having to get rid of any resources. Of course, this sort of thing never really came over to the TCG, and it'd be probably a ruling's nightmare to have a card also be multiple other ones at once, but it lets you do some pretty cool combos in the games. It would probably get abused relentlessly in the real game due to its crazy floating effect, which got upgraded from getting any Earthbound Immortal when it's destroyed, to just getting any card from your deck instead. God knows Infernity would have been a threat for much longer if their boss monster just floated back into Infernity Launcher if it was ever outed by your opponent. And at number 7, there's Jurassic Impact from the Tag Force games, a normal trap that can only be activated if your life points are lower than your opponent's. It destroys all monsters on the field, and then each player takes 300 life points of damage for each monster they control that was destroyed by the effect. Also, neither player can summon monsters until the end of your next turn. The Tag Force version of Jurassic Impact is essentially a torrential tribute stapled onto a heat wave, with the small cost of only being activatable if your life points are lower than your opponent's. This is, of course, a crazy card, and it would have no data seen playing the TCG if it wasn't nerfed as hard as it was. The version of this card we got has an extra restriction requiring to control at least 2 or more dinosaurs, and even if it bumped the burn damage up to 1,000 per monster instead, it makes you take it first, so you can't even force a draw as a last resort. The thing is that needing to control dinos made this card completely unusable, since dino decks are usually more combo based and would never bother with a trap like this. However, imagine if it was generic as the video game version. This card could have certainly been a staple in really slow strategies. Decks like Eldritch and Runic would kill for this, as its removal, interaction, and a floodgate all at once. Eldritch even has an in-engine way to lose life points, as well as having monsters that can't be destroyed by card effects anyways. Runic would need an extra card that fits the requirement, but stopping your opponent completely would certainly be more than worth it. Either way, looking at the decks that could use it, it probably was a blessing that Konami nuked this card's playability back into the Stone Age. And at number 6, we have Chaos Blast. This normal spell has you target a level 4 lower monster in your graveyard, and then sending 3 level 1 machines from your deck to the graveyard to destroy it. This is one of the simplest cards on this list, but its effect is ridiculously powerful. Dumping 3 machines from your deck is so powerful that needing to have a level 4 or lower monster in the field feels more like the card's restriction rather than its main upside. Granted, that isn't really the case in the Tag Force games where this was in, but nowadays this would be more than enough to let you build a crazy board by itself. Imagine a Drytron deck that just casually jumped 3 names to the graveyard, and then ending on a countless amount of Omni Negates. Or even a Synchro deck dumping Despot 001 in Jet Synchron for infinite setup fodder. There's just no telling what kind of crazy setups this could enable, and again, the only downside would be having to pop one of your own monsters if you were to use it going first, which is probably more than worth it. What's crazy is that they actually made it better in the Tag Force than it was in the anime, changing the cost from milling 3 to this diet painful choice for machine decks. This is understandable though, as in the 5Ds era where this card originated, there really wasn't much you could foolish with this. They probably changed it to make this card work better with the Mechlord Emperor creation, another video game exclusive that needs you to banish their versions of the Mechlords to summon out a Mechlord Astro Mechanical from your deck, ignoring its summon conditions. Though even for back then standards, Astro Mechanical was pretty bad even if you could bypass its awful summon conditions for this slightly less inconvenient one. And so, even if you were doing Aporia's route in Tag Force 6, you probably wouldn't bother with it. And at number 5, we have Fog Castle, another Tag Force exclusive. This is a field spell that makes it so whenever a monster you control is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon it back to your field, but the monster card zone used to occupy can no longer be used. Then if this card leaves you with no usable monster zones, you send it and your entire hand to the graveyard and add back 4 monsters from your graveyard to your hand, but you cannot conduct your battle phase a turn to use the effect. Now, there's a very clear reason why this card is limited in pretty much every Tag Force game it's in. Fog Castle is busted. Essentially, it just protects your entire board in a way that's better than if it just said that all your monsters can't be destroyed, as long as you build your deck around it. Since any monster in your field that gets destroyed will just come back, this card goes extremely well with floating and on-summon effects like Sangan and Stratos, getting you a free search every time these guards are removed by destruction. And even if you will eventually run out of zones to work with, all the search power will more than make up for it. Also, this card's effects will just make filling up your zones more of a bonus than anything else, as getting back 4 monsters from the grave is a crazy effect. In terms of raw card advantage, it's hard to think of a card that can plus you more in the course of a duel than Fog Castle, and luckily the AI in these games is never smart enough to point their MST at it instantly. This card could never be released into the game as is, as imagine a deck that destroys their own cards like Unchained, getting their downsides erased completely, and eventually even adding back their whole engine and hand traps to their hand at once. Fog Palace is one of these cards we'd only ever want to see released just to know how badly nerfed it'd get. And at number 4, we have Mimicat from Duels of the Roses. This card's effect is to select, revive, and control 1 card from either graveyard. To put it into a more PSCT-like fashion, this card targets any card in any of the graveyards, and if it's a monster, you special summon it to your field, while if it's a spell or trap, you activate it from the graveyard instead. Now, to give some context to those who've never played Duels of the Roses, it's certainly one of the most unique Yu-Gi-Oh video games out there. It plays more like a tactics game than an actual card game, with you moving your units on a grid, having to worry about effects laid down on the terrain, and even having to protect what is called your deck leader. But even within the confines of such a different game, Mimicat still manages to be an ultra powerful option, enough so that it's not even available through normal gameplay, but rather you need a special password for it. A card like this being put into the real game would surely be game defining. Monster Reborn might not be the staple it once was, as we have limited deck space these days and not many decks make use of it, but a straight up better version of it would surely make some waves. Getting to either get back a monster to keep extending, or just copy a powerful spell that was either used the turn before or was negated, would be way too much utility for a single card. We've already had Pseudo-Spacey playing competitive decks solely due to being additional copies of a field spell, and every other meta people discuss of made-to-order Mermaid Outfit Outfitter is maybe playable now, and Mimicat would just be a better version of both. Konami, unfortunately, picked up on how busted this would have been, as when they were finally ready to release a playable version of Mimicat 15 years after Duels of the Roses released, it came packaged with the heavy restrictions of needing to control both Toon World and a Toon Monster, as well as only being able to copy cards in your opponent's graveyard and not your own. And at number 3, we have Ecole de Zone. This is a field spell that makes it so that each time a monster is normal or special summoned, that monster gets destroyed, and then you special summon a mask token with the same stats as that monster. This token is level 1 Dark Spellcaster and comes out with the same battle position the monster was in. The video game / anime version of Ecole de Zone would be a really nasty floodgate if it was ever put into the real game. It works kind of like a reverse Black Garden, filling up your zones with tokens as you attempt to play. As a baseline, this card makes all monsters with ignition effects completely useless outside of their stats, as you won't ever get a window to activate their effects. And even if you're bringing out something with a quick effect, it'll force you to immediately use it on summon anyways, if you even can. This is an extremely debilitating effect, as even if most of the good monsters have unsummon effects, good luck trying to build a board when all your guys are getting replaced by tokens. Pretty much all extra deck summoning methods are rendered completely unusable while this card's on the field. The only way to get around this card is to either put out a monster that's indestructible, which isn't that easy for most decks, or if you manage to summon 2 or more monsters at once, which is also not that easy to come by. If you could just go first, make your own board, and then activate this card, you could be sure that your opponent would never be able to make theirs. This card would be severely nerfed when brought over to the TCG, with the main change being that it was turned into a hard once per turn, making it go from a really annoying floodgate to a piece of spot removal that's almost trivial to play around. And at number 2, we have Illusion Gate. When activated, this normal spell destroys as many monsters your opponent controls as possible. Then you special summon a monster from your opponent's graveyard to your field, ignoring its summon conditions. However, during the end phase of the turn this card was activated, you lose 90% of your current life points. Who'd have thought a random one-off villain from GX like Camilla would have access to a busted card like this? Illusion Gate is essentially Raigeki combined with Monster Reborn, 2 cards that were long confined to the Forbidden List in Tag Force 1, the game where this card originated. While we get to play 3 Raigekis and 1 Monster Reborn in the TCG nowadays, a card like this would probably still not be okay. While the former sometimes sees plays these days, the biggest downside is that there are many modern monsters who can easily come back and even plus when destroyed. Illusion Gate's second part of this gets rid of that issue entirely, since you can then pluck the problem card out of your opponent's graveyard while it resolves, leaving these kinds of effects no window where they can trigger. Sure, losing 90% of your life points is a lot, but it'll never be enough to kill you. And the game's so fast nowadays that if you don't out your opponent's board, you're going to die anyways. Though even in past formats, this would have been such a crazy effect to be able to resolve that it'd probably be still used anyways. In the anime, this card actually needs you to offer up your own soul to use it. And if you lose the duel, well, you know what happens, making it kind of like the GX version of the Seal of Orichalcos, except it actually gives you an effect that's worth losing your soul over. Even in the Tag Force games where you have access to it, this card is limited, and usually pretty annoying to acquire too. If they ever make an Illusion Gate for the real game, it'll probably be as crippled as the next card was. Boo, I'm from the future.
OMG, are you me from the future?
No, I'm just from the future.
Oh, well, can I help you?
Yes, on June 14th, something amazing is going to happen.
Oh, is that when I meet my future wife? Or maybe land my dream job?
Even better, it's when the new VTuber Corp started by TheDuelLogs is launched, and it takes the world by storm.
What's a VTuber Corp?
Oh, it's kind of like a talent agency where they hire on talented streamers and take a cut of their earnings in order to hire managers, editors, set up whatever merch they want, and organize conventional appearances for them.
That sounds like a scam. Why would a streamer want to sign up for that when they can do it themselves?
Because the logistics behind doing all that extra stuff is a huge pain in the butt, and they'd rather just focus on streaming.
Oh, I guess that makes sense. So are the ones from Glitch Stars any good?
Well, you'll need to see for yourself on June 14th. Just click the link in the video description and watch. You pay for the whole seat, but you'll only need the edge.
So you have to pay for it?
No, it's free. That's just insane. And finally, at number 1, we have the video game version of Sabatiel the Philosopher's Stone. This card lets you pay half your life points to add any card from your deck or graveyard to your hand, and then you shuffle this card back into your deck. If you activate this effect 3 times, you also get to target a monster you control and multiply its attack by the number of monsters you control until the end of the turn. Also, when a winged Kiteroid you control is destroyed, you can add this card from your deck to your hand. Though one thing more broken than Illusion Gate, a card which combines 2 previously banned staples together, is Sabatiel. Despite Konami's inexperience and many mistakes they made in very early Yu-Gi-Oh!, they still never printed a card which just adds any other card from your deck to your hand. And this card is even better than that. If Sabatiel was ever legal, it'd be played at maximum copies in every single deck, going first or second. It's arguably better than a Pot of Greed and makes Upstart Goblin's theory of a 37 card deck look like a bad joke. On the dice roll, just add your starter from your deck to your hand. Already have it? Then any going first staple will do. Going second, you can choose exactly which card your opponent's board is going to lose to. All of this while still having less of a life point cost than Illusion Gate. This card is probably good enough to make Winged Kuriboh a consideration in the modern game, though if it kept that part of the effect, it'd be a ruling's nightmare. Cards that summon themselves from the deck is one thing, but a card which triggers an effect from the deck would be a new path entirely. And since it's a when you can, it'd even open up the avenue for a card to miss timing straight from the deck. This card is so broken that even in the anime they had to come up with a reason why Jaden could only use it for a single duel and never again. And even in the games, it's often straight up forbidden unless you change the ban list. It got rightfully debuffed in the ground when being brought over, now requiring you to have a Winged Kuriboh in your graveyard to even activate it and adding either Polymerization or a fusion spell instead of just any card. It's a shame standalone Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games have pretty much stopped being a thing ever since Master Duel came out, if only because we will never see a card to top this version of Sabatiel ever again. Alright, and that's the list. If you happen to know of any other cards you might have missed or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.